Thanks for joining me for part 2 of my series on how to make a file card book. And in today's video, we're going to talk about how to make the individual pieces, the individual file cards. In order to put them together, I'm going to need a couple of different pieces. Last time we talked about these little file folders. This size is one that I die cut. Using Tim Holtz Chapter 3 dies, and then this file folder that I used on the base of this, and I have a few more of ideology. So these are two different sizes, and as I mentioned last time, this larger size I will use for these botanical images, and the smaller size I'm planning to use for these bird images. And so today I want to talk about the next layer up. So what I'm going to put on top of the file cards as my second layer. So what we'll do is make a pocket out of the file card layer and then add something else that might also be a pocket as the second layer. Or it might just be something that contains the image. So it could be like a little envelope with a window and mica over it that shows one of these little bird cards, or something similar to that. So I'm going to talk about a couple of different options for that. So one of the things I mentioned last time was another Chapter 2 die will give you these. If I want to use these as a background for my birds, they're just about the right size, but I'd have to flip them this way, which would make like a sort of a side pocket here. Anytime you can create a pocket, it gives you an opportunity for a little bit more embellishment. So something like that would make a beautiful little card. I'm also going to use a lot of little pieces of collage paper. Okay, so I've got a few more ideology pieces that I've pulled out to work with, and a few of my images that I'll work with today. On this is a die cut envelope that I've just stitched around. That's an option to add a little bit of detail. Okay, the next step is to start layering things. This is the fun part, and it might look a little bit random, but the next stage is to start putting some of these things together. This is just two old pieces of paper that I've stitched together to make a little pocket. I cut it in half. It was like this. I stitched it on my sewing machine. This is always a good way to make a pocket, but only for very thin things. So if you want to stick something like this in there, it works fine, but you don't want something with a lot of embellishment on it. It would go very nicely on one of these envelopes. And one of these little birds could be added with some little photo corners, and that would make a great little stack. This is also, for this I want a bigger envelope or a bigger file folder. For something like this, I can just add one of these little envelopes that I made from a die cut, and I'm going to stick one of these little pieces in it. I'll ink it and turn it into something that looks like this before it gets stuck in there. And then I might do one more like this with one of these ideology pieces. I really love these pieces from Ideology, and again I've just added a coat of watercolor to the top to tint it. So I think maybe I'll start there, and I might wind up doing one or two other things along the way, but I think I'll start with these stacks of things, and I might do one more if I think of something else to stack. This might get layered behind something. I have these little things pulled out so that I can add them to my cards, and I'll round the edges of my cards. So I'm going to pause for just a second while I pull out some tools, and then we'll get started making these stacks. And the next piece I'm going to ink is this. I'm going to round the corners. There are 3 different choices. I think I'm going to do the medium size. I can't remember what I did on the first ones, but I think it was probably the medium size. That looks about right. Yeah. Sometimes I would cut something like this as a tag, but in this case I think I just want it to be rectangle, but add a little pole at the top where I can attach a little string tie like I would to a tag. So the next step is just to ink this up and then glue it down. So I'm going to use the same little ink blender with some vintage photo ink on it. As I'm making a book, one of the things that I always think about as I'm making it is what are my favorite pieces. I usually will set aside some of my favorite pieces to go on the cover. And I think that this might go on the cover. I kind of like that one. That's an Allison Bomber stamp that I've added watercolor to. And I kind of like that one. I love these Tim Holtz ones too, but I think that one might be a favorite. So I'm gonna just set it aside for the moment and not use it. Okay, so I got this little card and I'm gonna just punch out the center of it. My hole puncher is a little bit too small to get the whole center. So I usually kind of just go around and punch a few times. Under here. I find about 9 inches is about what will work for something like this. So I'm guessing about 9 inches. One to come out like that. So I'm just going to take 2 back to front. Up to the top. Pull it to adjust the length. You always want it to be a little bit longer than the finished piece is going to be, just to give you enough to easily pull it through. Okay, so that looks good. I'm just going to shorten my 2 ends. Oops. There we go. That should work. There. So now I have a little piece that can go in a pocket. Envelopes into pockets. These little strips of paper that I mentioned in my first video. Whenever I cut up file folders, I save these edges. So I'm just going to take my scissors and cut 2 pieces that are the same width as the bottom part of this file folder. I'm just going to quickly add some ink to the outside edges of these. That's the only part of it that's going to show. The rest of it is going to be inside the pocket. I'm going to add some glue to each side. just going to place this right up against the side of the folder. And I'm just going to close the folder. And then just rub each side down to make sure that my glue is even. And then that'll make a pocket. There. And I'm going to do the same to this one off camera. Okay. So I have 3 of these made up. I have these pieces inked. And then to finish them off, I want to do a couple of things. I want to do a little bit of background stamping, and then I also want to collage some pieces together using things like some ideology pieces, some of my little tags, and just some pieces of paper, old and new. So I might use some strips of this beautiful ledger paper. I might use some old pieces of paper like these little advertisements. Okay, so I've pulled out a selection of some ideology pieces that I'd like to use, and some old stamps. These are the new Tim Holtz stamps in this booklet, and I just love them. I think I'm going to use these a lot. The colors are just gorgeous. So I'm going to pull some from this orange sheet to use today, because I think I'm going to use primarily sort of oranges and blues and maybe a little bit of green. But what I'm doing is just kind of pulling out some pieces to use as collage fodder for the background. Little pieces of paper that are going to get stuck in, and I kind of like that piece. Collage strips ideology. And last year there were collage pieces that looked like this, and this year there are bigger collage pieces that look like this, and I just love it because I'll use both of them. And I love it that you get the different scale of the different pieces. And so I'm going to cut up a few of those. You know, I think I mentioned in the last video that one idea for doing ID cards or for doing index cards is to do ID cards. And so if you have just faces of single faces of people, they make great little cards to make sort of like little fake ID cards. I've seen other makers do this. I think Marley's has done some videos that were wonderful, and a few other of the Tim Holtz makers have done that kind of thing. So I probably won't do that, but because I tend to do more things that are more sort of nature oriented. But that would be a really cute book to do, just sort of ID cards all together. So I would encourage you to check out some of those videos and see. Okay, so I've got a whole bunch of collage pieces, more than I need. So I think I'm going to put these away. My eye goes right to this one. I don't know why. But I'm going to take this piece I'm going to ink up the edges. Get a little bit more ink in my blender and just quickly ink the edges. As I'm doing this, I don't mind that it's getting kind of wrinkled, because the more wrinkled the better. And I kind of like this piece too. Kind of like this piece. I always like these pieces. But I need some contrast, so I think I'm going to pull out a few of these blue pieces too. Love that piece. It's got a little bit of blue in it, but this is a great blue to use. My old ledger paper, that's one of my standbys. This is also sort of a pattern of old ledger paper that I like. This could have this real old postage stamp on it. I kind of like the idea of collaging with an old postage stamp and one of the new Tim Holtz ones on the same piece. So I might do that. Okay, so I'm going to ink up this piece. I'll probably wind up cutting it in half and using half on one side and half on the other. The edges are going to go underneath the envelope, so it's just kind of making a background. This piece. Look at this. You can see why I like these little ink blenders, because the scale of the pieces that I often use to collage with are small, and so a big ink blender, you can very quickly cover up your entire piece with ink. Okay, that gives me a little bit to work with there. And so let's see how we do with these pieces, and then see what else we need to ink up. I'm going to start with a piece of this. So what I usually do is kind of try to balance it like this by putting one on one side and the other on the other side. And I think about what other pieces I want to put together with it and how far out I want them to stick. Could put her right on the envelope if I wanted to. And I'm gonna do a piece of this here. Just like that. extra inking. Okay, so let's just see which of these postage stamps might work. Actually, I really love that one. I love the shape of it. And I love the color of it. It's a nice natural color. Pull off this one to use with this. I think it might work a little bit better. I'm gonna ink the edges and wrinkle them a little bit so that they don't look too perfect. There. And I think I'm gonna put this down like that. I'm going to use this old piece on top. I might wait and do some stamping before I glue that down. Okay, it's about like that. Looks about right. Make sure that it's straight. Okay, so I've got a couple of different layers of collage here. So I'm going to pull these apart for the moment and think about, I should have attached this button before I glued this, but no harm done. I'm sure it'll come apart and go back together easily. So I'm just going to pull this up a little bit. Think about where I want my button. I use this little foam pad to make a couple of holes with my awl to sew my button. So I'm just going to sneak this under there like that and get my awl out. Out of respect for old materials, I never glue on an old button. I think they look a lot prettier when they are stitched on. And with antique buttons, it means that you haven't put anything on there that will decrease their value. So I just opened it up a little bit. Stitch my buttons. I've got my thread tied off. I usually tie it off and then I put a piece of tape on top of it just to make sure that the threads don't catch on anything and pull it off. So that's it. No problem. A little bit of glue there. And I've got my button sewn on. Okay. And then where was I? Something like this. Okay. Add a tiny bit of brown to the edges of this. Okay, so I've got this little piece for here. I've got this little real stamp here. This is a stamp from the new Tim Holtz Ideology. This is a real stamp, real Australia stamp from my collection. So, a little dab of glue here. My dog Seamus is my craft dog today. He's sleeping behind me and he just started to snore. So if you hear any strange noises, that might be what it is. Usually Buttercup is in here with me. She's the younger one. Seamus is my older Basset Hound and Buttercup is the younger one. Yep, he's snoring now. I hope you can't hear that. Might get a little louder. Buttercup doesn't really snore yet. She's still a baby. Buttercup is only a year old. She just turned a year old a couple weeks ago. And I've had her since she was 6 months old. And funny story about Buttercup. Her name was supposed to be Rosebud. I was determined that my next Basset Hound would be named Rosebud because my last female was Violet, and I like botanical names for girls. So she came home and her name was Rosebud for about 24 hours. And the next day, this is something crafters will appreciate. I was watching one of the Tim Holtz lives, and he always says, "Buckle up, Buttercup." And when he said that, I thought, oh, Buttercup, what a great name. So many nicknames, so many possibilities. I immediately started going through all the options. Like, I could say, "Buckle up, Buttercup," like Tim does, or I could say, "What's up, Buttercup?" And all kinds of nicknames. Buttercup gets called Butternut Squash sometimes when she's acting a little nutty. Sometimes just Butternut, or sometimes Nutter Butter if she's acting nutty. Sometimes at night when she's really quiet and sweet, and she is just so adorable. I call her buttercream frosting because she's so sweet. So she has a lot of nicknames. I'm going to do a little bit of stamping before I glue down my envelope because I just want to be able to put in a few things without trying to angle them around the edges of my envelope. So I'm going to I use this little date a lot because it's April 15th, 1940. You've probably seen it on just about everything I make because it is one of the few things that is just the right size to stick in a lot of places. I could really use another one just like this with a date. So I'm gonna put this, I'm gonna get a piece of scrap paper. Here is a piece of scrap paper. Just so that my stamp isn't too dark. I'm gonna stamp there first and stamp here second. And I might actually do one here too. Let's do a third generation like that. You can just see it a little bit in the background. And we'll do this number 2. I'll do this one in blue. Night sky. I'm doing 2 stamps on the same page, like that one where I did the 2nd generation stamp here and the 3rd there. I will turn it in the other direction, just like I do with my little collage pieces, just to give it a little bit of balance. I think I'm going to use this. I'm not sure whether it's upside down or wrong side up, but we will try it out first. I'm going to do this one in blue. That's right side up. So I'm going to do it up here where it's only going to be partially show. Part of it will be under the envelope. And again, I might just do it like this. 3rd. One of my favorite stamps and one I'll be using a lot on this project. I might even use it on every single piece, at least of the botanical group. I have this really gorgeous paper artsy stamp designed by Raquel Barillo. Scrap Cozy. I'm not sure exactly how she says it, but it's Raquel Barillo, and she is wonderful. Love her journals, love her work, and I love her stamps. And this is one of my favorites. I could stamp this on everything and still be very happy. As a matter of fact, I'm going to do the 1st generation stamp on this file folder. I'm going to stick this next to it because I'm going to go over the edge. So this will be a little bit darker, but that's okay because it'll be so pretty and only parts of it will show. So I'm going to do that. Isn't that the most beautiful stamp? I just love it. Love, love, love. And I'm going to I'll do it on the same side right here. It's going to go on, this is on a different file folder, so it's not on the same place. There we go, perfect. One of my favorites. Most of my stamps are organized in their original packaging, but there are a certain number of stamps that I use over and over and over and over again, and they get stuck in here. These are almost all Paper Artsy or Tim Holtz. A lot of them have numbers. A lot of them are just text. I think this one is an Allison Bomber. It says herbal on it, so I pulled that one out for this project. Got lots of numbers, lots of little tiny squiggles, and sometimes words that I love to use over and over again. Fine rubber stamps is one of my favorites. Fine Joy. That winds up all over the place on my work because it's in this bin, and this is what I do when I'm looking for some quick little thing to put on the edge. Okay, so let's do these little stamps that are these weird little vintage shape things. These came with Tim Holtz set that has moths, and I use these far more often. This one that I just used over here, white, that is one. I use these over and over and over again. I'm gonna do this one in, let's see, I think I need something else in sepia. So let's give this a try. I never clean my stamps, so sometimes they come out a little funky looking, and if they do, I just re-ink it, and the second one always comes out terrific. So I don't worry about it. There, the color looks perfect. I'm going to do one down in this corner that's kind of overlapping here, like that, just to add some interest in that corner. And I think I need one more tiny thing down here. Figure 7 maybe. Can never have too many numbers. Okay, I'll do this one in blue. That'll be 3 things in blue. It has to be 3 of something, 3 in one color. I'm gonna make this one a little darker, just to sort of go wild. Every once in a while I want something just a little bit darker, first generation. And then I'm going to do that like that. So I think I have enough stamping here. Am I going to be able to see that? I'm not going to be able to see that. So I'm just going to leave this like this and glue that down to the surface like that. But first I'm going to do a little bit more stamping on the top, maybe a little more collage on the top of this. So let's find a few more pieces. Since I have this blue piece down here, I might want to do another blue piece near the top. This blue blue, old blue ledger paper is one of my go-tos to put on everything. And I think that when I use it with a bunch of these little pieces of Tim Holtz ideology or little bits of scrapbook paper, backdrops paper, there, that's better. Just a little bit of a hang off the edge. Yep, I'm gonna go with that. This little number 5 label. It's just a way of layering your stamping, really, because this is just a die cut with a stamp on it. But it just adds a little bit of vintage interest. Okay. I think I'm happy with that. Sometimes it's good to leave a little blank page. I'm going to mark with a pencil where I want the glue to go. So I don't want it to go above here, because otherwise it's going to slop onto my file folder. So this is going to go right in the middle of my collage, about that far from the bottom. No glue on to mess up the back. And that's it. I like this better than the first one. I think the first one I was in kind of a hurry, and I wasn't really, didn't have all my collage pieces out on my table yet. But I'll probably find a couple of things to stick on there to make it more interesting. But I do like this one quite a bit. And I'm happy with having a little bit of solid page. It's not really solid because it's a watercolor wash, but I think that in decorating they always say that you want to have a place to rest your eye, a solid to rest your eye. So I'm very happy with that. So one finished page in this group and a whole bunch of partial pieces ready to go. So I think I'm going to stop there for today.